Okay, so that is the defense wrapping the closing arguments there in Skyler Richardson's trial. We just heard him talk about the reasonable doubt and the burden of proof. He went through that definition for everyone and explained that. New guest here with us to break this down, Misty Meyers. What do you think about these closing arguments? Welcome, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Look, I think he did a really good job because as a defense attorney, it's really important that the jury understand that the burden of proof is on the prosecution. A huge thing that this attorney addressed in his closing is the fact that Skyler did not testify. Oftentimes, when you're at the very beginning of the case and you're an attorney and you're doing voir dire, you want to make sure you weed out any jurors who will have a bias against the defendant if they don't take the stand. Now, who knows what happens as you have an impaneled jury and they're on the stand, so it's really important that the defense attorney make that point. Also, going back to a discussion you were having before, the focus on the science is so key. Think about the charges we have in this case: aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter. These are serious charges. The cause of death is actually pretty critical to the prosecution's case. So the defense attorney did a good job of addressing the fact that the science isn't really proving what the prosecutors want it to say.
Absolutely. And we'll go on to listen to the prosecution rebuttal. That's coming up after this. Andrew, you were laughing when you heard him mentioning the manipulative interrogation of Skylar. Why?
Well, I was laughing because when you have the instruction that you can't consider somebody's silence against them, the fact that they didn't testify. Now, traditionally, the defense attorney isn't allowed to then explain why somebody doesn't testify because they're essentially testifying themselves. The attorney's saying, well, she didn't testify because she's already been through something manipulative. That's not exactly what he said. He kind of walked a tighter line than that. But he was walking this interesting line as defense counsel that we often have of first arguing you can't use against our client the fact that they remained seated, but then you add a little bit about like, well, here's maybe why they didn't testify. Well, realistically, that's not technically appropriate. The jury's supposed to figure that out for themselves. I have a rule. There's kind of 4 parts to the rule, but one of them is if the client has already said something and it's in front of the jury, why have them testify again? We have hours of interview with law enforcement and her statements to her parents. Why would she take the witness stand again, subject herself to cross-examination, which she's already been through in terms of the police interrogating her? What does that do to advance anybody's case here? So it wasn't a bad decision not to call her, and I thought it was kind of creative how he addressed the facts of why she perhaps didn't testify in this case.
All right, Andrew, thanks. We have one more part of the defense's closings that we want to play for you. Let's listen. So the first we've heard so far of the prosecution's rebuttal. Andrew, we talked about the strong close by the defense. Curious to see, what do you think of the prosecution rebuttal so far?
Angelica, I think my bias is going to come out. I try to come on the network and be as neutral as possible, but I definitely in this case have a bias towards the case that the defense put on. I don't care for, and I was a prosecutor and a senior prosecutor for a long time, and I just don't care for prosecution theories that center around this: a innocent person wouldn't have done X, Y, and Z. I get it. Sometimes it resonates with certain jurors, but I really don't like cases that are based on that. And that's exactly what this rebuttal is based on. That this person, that Misty wouldn't have sent these text messages if the baby was stillbirth versus being murdered. I guess either way it could have happened. I mean, she could be elated and happy if this baby came into this world dead. I mean, it doesn't make her a good person. We're not dealing with a person who has particularly strong senses of morals at the age and circumstances that she's at. But you can't say that just because she was pleased that her belly is back to where it was means that she must have murdered the baby. It could mean that the baby came out and she's elated and happy that she doesn't have to deal with the responsibility of having a live child for the rest of her life. So it's a point that's made. It's a point that perhaps a juror will take on, and maybe somebody will hone in on it. I don't find it to be a compelling way to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, Andrew, thanks. He also references those text messages and her saying how happy she is. This was after the fact, and mentioned how it was easy for her to portray herself as someone who loved her daughter and all of these things, but that, of course, isn't the case. So he kind of goes after her character and those character witness statements that we heard earlier. Lisa Lockwood, I'll bring you in right now. What do you think he should touch on, or what do you think so far of this rebuttal? And I have a question about that one photo, because this photo kind of got me, the photo of her making the duck face, if you will, the selfie, and that was the day after. What'd you think of that?
Well, one of the things that I paid attention to, and the scrutiny of her psychologist. When the psychologist said that she does have the ability to compartmentalize, she does have the ability to push things away that are going to cause her to be put in a position of anxiety or fear. So because of that analysis from the psychologist, I believe that that was what was happening in those moments. Let's just put aside the fact, did she or did she not kill this baby? And if it had come out and we're alive and there was a completely different scenario, how it would be handled. But the fact of that particular text, I believe that she did compartmentalize and went on with her life.
All right, Lisa, thank you. We have a couple more parts of the prosecution's closing we want to play for you. Let's listen. Okay, so that is the rest of the prosecution rebuttal there, and I'm going to bring in Misty Meyers now. What do you think of this? You mentioned that he's kind of getting at the emotion here.
Right, he's absolutely using words, almost inflaming words, to get to the emotional aspect of the case. Of course, when you're dealing with a baby, the emotions run high with the jury. So some of the language that he used in the rebuttal, he specifically said, after she murdered her daughter. I mean, that is something that sticks in the jury's mind. Also, the fact focusing on the text messages, the photograph that tend to show no remorse, in addition to bringing back this interview, which for the defense, the interview is probably the most damaging in the sense that, you know, she's given a lot of information contemporaneously that is damaging to her. Now they have to backtrack off of that. Prosecutors taking that, flipping it on its head and saying, hey, look, doesn't that mean she's also afraid of disappointing her parents? I think that prosecutors oftentimes, they got to go with the flow a little bit. They lost here on the science. They know that. So playing up the emotional factors could be a potentially a good tactic with a jury who is probably having a difficult time getting over the death of a baby from the get-go.
Absolutely. All right, Misty, thank you. We have to take a quick break right now on Law and Crime. When we come back, we'll play more from the closing arguments. Stay with us.